Here we go. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Weiner. I want to thank the Eastchester Library for inviting me this afternoon to talk a little bit about baseball and the culture. I think in this entire talk, I talk about one game, and it's an inconsequential World Series game, and it has no meaning on what happened during the World Series, but something happened during that game that would impact Yankee history or Yankee folklore, one of the two. My name again, Evan Weiner. I've been doing this kind of thing since 1971. I was on WRKL in Rockland County doing my high school show with Gene Delisio at Spring Valley High School, and that was called Tiger Talk, and that was done back in 1971 because a guy named Joe Denisio, who is my English teacher, said, "You have a good voice. How'd you like to be in radio?" I said, "Sure." And I was. And we did a high school show. And Joe also opened the door for me to work at the Bergen Record and also the Journal News, which bears no resemblance to today's Journal News that was in Nyack, New York. My background includes doing some news for WNEW AM radio during the salad days of William B. Williams and Julius LaRosa. He used to sing national anthems at Shea Stadium and was a hell of a nice guy. This guy there I'm standing next to, this is a picture from April of 2006. It is, of course, Yogi Berra, who at that point in 2006 was 80 years old. He was 81 years old, as a matter of fact. Well, not quite. He was a couple weeks away from his birthday right then. And look at the baseball cards behind him. Those are some valuable cards that were stolen from the Yogi Berra Museum. Anyway, in the glory days of baseball, or baseball's golden era, whatever you want to call it, in the 1950s, Yogi was everywhere. He was on Wonderama with Sonny Fox. He was on What's My Line. He was in commercials, and he was playing baseball in the Fall Classic virtually every year. He did it in 1954. Nor did he do it in 1959 because the Yankees didn't make the World Series. But between 1950 and 59, 8 World Series. They were beaten in 1955 by Johnny Padres, who, by the way, won a Corvette, and he drove it home from Brooklyn to Glens Falls, went into the military, and his father got a hold of the car and traded it in for a more useful car than the Corvette. Johnny Padres. And also the Yankees did not win against the Milwaukee Braves, who was at 57 or so. Anyway, so Yogi's everywhere. And in 1954, it is the golden age of baseball, at least in the New York area. And there was a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Barzun who noted, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of baseball had better, or rather of America, had better learn baseball. And don't do it in a major league game. Do it where you can really sit and watch the game, like sandlot baseball with kids, or high school baseball, or minor league baseball. That would be really good because you get to see how people interacted, and that's what America was all about, according to Barzun in 1954. Baseball has been in the American culture forever, so it seems, actually since 1888, when a guy by the name of Ernest Thayer wrote a poem that I had to read as a 4th grader at PS 151 in Woodside, Queens, and maybe some of you too had to read it as well. I was in 4th grade. I was a year ahead, so I was only 8 going on 9 years old in April of 1965. You're younger than everybody else, and probably a wise guy in class, to say the least. And I had a teacher by the name of Miss Alexander, and she was about 192 years old. Well, seriously, she was in her 60s. She had the blue hair. She had the white blouse. She had the blue skirt, and she had that napkin tucked in right here in case her nose ran. And she gives us an assignment. And the assignment's pretty simple. We have to read this poem. It's called Casey at the Bat. And then we had to write a paragraph about the poem, about what we thought of the poem, and we had to hand it in. And me, hey, I was watching the Mets those days, and the Yankees, that was the beginning of the decline, 1965, and I saw a lot of strikeouts and on TV. And so Miss Alexander looks at my paper, and it says, I think Casey was a lousy player. He struck out with the game on the line. He wasn't a very good player. Well, there's no joy in Mudville for the mighty Casey who struck out. No, 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 said Miss Alexander, not at all. And I don't know if you handed in or you got the same assignment as I did, but she said, no, no, no. It's all about man's failures. That man could be set up and he could be in a position to succeed, but man strikes out. And that's the lesson that you should take away from Casey at the bat. Well, my lesson that I took away was Casey was a lousy player. But who is Casey, and why did Thayer print this without author's credit? Well, Ernest Thayer was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1866 and 1888. We have one thing in common, me and Thayer. I wrote op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the year 2001. So he wrote in the 19th century, I wrote in the 21st century. So we have that in common with the San Francisco Examiner. Thayer apparently liked baseball, but decided that this poem that he wrote, I don't know if he wasn't proud of it or whatever it was, or just a throwaway piece, he writes without author's credit. It's just there in the San Francisco Examiner on June 3rd, 1888. Who was Casey? Thayer never said. Might have been Mike King Kong Kelly, who was a pretty good baseball player in New England. Thayer went to school in Harvard. Or in Stockton, California, locals claim that it's about us. In fact, their minor league team is called the Mudville Nine in Stockton, California. It's about a guy who played for us, who struck out in a key game. Thayer never said who it was. And another guy last week, I was doing this talk, and he suggested it was Dave Casey, who played with Baltimore in the mid-1880s. But Thayer never said who it was. After the poem became very famous on the vaudeville stage, Thayer did read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895. But there was one baseball fan in particular, who fell in love with Casey at the bat. It was this guy. His name, DeWolf Hopper. Now, some of you who are old like me might remember in the 1960s, DeWolf Hopper's daughter, Heather Hopper, was on all these talk shows like the Merv Griffin show. She was a gossip columnist, but before that, she was an actress. This guy, DeWolf Hopper, somehow gets his hands on this poem. San Francisco was a very small town out in the middle of nowhere back in 1888. So somebody had to give him the San Francisco Examiner, cut out the poem, and give him the poem. And he falls in love with the poem. He's a vaudevillian. He's an actor. And he sees, hey, wait a minute, I can make something out of this poem. And he does. He performs it for the first time in vaudeville on August 14th, 1888. It's estimated that Hopper performed Casey at the bat more than 10,000 times in his career, which ran from the late 1880s into the early 1920s, doing this for about 35 years. But if you didn't get a chance to go out on the vaudeville stage to see Hopper, well, there was a chance that you could, at home, listen to the poem. And that is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And there was a guy in Springfield, New Jersey. He was a hermit. He lived by himself. He had no heirs, but he collected a lot of interesting stuff, like that thing called the Regina Sublima. It was from about the 1890s. And somehow it ended up in the library in this big room in Springfield, New Jersey, which is a little Springfield, New Jersey museum as well. And there are other things in cases. It's the big room where you give talks and all that. But on that cylinder, if you put it into that contraction and cranked it up a little bit, you could hear recorded sound. Now on this thing, which actually does work, there was a sousaphone, there was a Sousa marching band song on there. But if you had one of these at home and you want to listen to Casey at the bat, this guy could help you out. His name, Russell Hunting. And in 1893, he decided, he was an entertainer and he played around with sound. He decides to record this onto the cylinder. And also again in 18 98. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue, probably because it was King Kong Kelly or Casey, and he figured that he was Irish. In 1905, John Kaiser recorded it for Thomas Edison down in Menlo Park. Hopper would record a version for Victor before it became RCA Victor, his master's voice, but that would not come out until 1906. But if you had a house and you were interested in recording, hey, you could play it on the old gramophone. All you have to do is crank it up. This gramophone is a picture from October of 2019 in Sagaway-Chicoutimi, Canada. I speak on cruise ships, and I'm always looking for offbeat things. And I'm just walking through a neighborhood, and this guy had his garage open, and I spotted that, and I said, that's great. That's going into my baseball talk. And then to his right is Edison, or the phonograph's right to my left. So if you're home and you want to listen to Casey at the Bat, well, you could listen to it on a phonograph with a record. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film. That would be a short subject made by Lee DeForest in 1922. Wallace Beery starred in a 1927 film version of it. You might remember the comic Jerry Colonna. He was Bob Hope's second banana. Where's your Huda? That was his one of his trademark sayings. And also he had that big, furry Joseph Stalin type mustache. So he records a rendition for Disney, and that would become the basis for a 1946 Disney cartoon called Casey at the Bat. And the first slide I showed you about Casey came out of that cartoon. Jackie Gleason performed it on his TV show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others. George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin together also voiced the poem often in orchestral settings. George and Billy did it to raise money for the Tampa PBA. Take a look at that sign today. It's a New York City subway sign. That's what it is, a New York City subway sign. And on that subway sign, it says ballpark today at the Polo Grounds. Kind of wondered if it stood out next to Dr. Zinmore's sitz treatments, which are all over the subways. But anyway, there was a songwriter by the name of Jack Norwood. And he's looking at this sign, and he's looking at the sign, and he's looking at the sign, and he's thinking, and he's thinking, he's thinking, ball game today at the Polo Grounds. New York Giants are obviously playing. You know, that might be a good idea for a song. He was a lyricist, and he went to see his, I guess, his friend, Albert von Tilzer, who wrote music. And apparently they discussed what he talked about in terms of, hey, let's write a song today. And that song is still sung today. And there is Harry Carey, who I worked with back in 1994, 1995. A guy who literally showed up to his job with his 6 best friends next to him, 6 friends named Bud, last name Weiser. Anyway, the song is about baseball. And you know the main part of the song, take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Well, you know that part of the song. Norwood may have been influenced by an old girlfriend when he wrote that song. Because if you look at how that song and who sings that song, it's not sung by a little kid. It's not sung by a guy. It is sung by a woman from a woman's viewpoint, which is highly unusual in 1908 when the song was written. Now, Norwood had a girlfriend who was a suffragette, who was trying to advance the cause for women and might have gone to baseball games. Women back in 1906, 1907, 1908, there was no room for them at baseball games. In fact, it was considered very unladylike for a woman to go to a baseball game. The baseball games were basically just, well, what they were baseball players were rough guys. The people in attendance were rough guys. And you know, it just wasn't a place for a woman. But anyway, so that he starts writing the song about a woman by the name of Katie Casey. And Katie Casey is apparently a young woman who is going out with some guy or knows some guy. We think it's the boyfriend, probably is the boyfriend, but could be a brother, could be a father, could be a friend, but we think it's the boyfriend. And she's got the baseball bug, and she's got it bad. She's got the baseball bug, and she really, really, really has it bad. And she and the boyfriend are going back and forth. What should we do? What should we do? Should we go here? Should we go there? Here, where should we go? And finally, they're going back and forth. And she says, you know what? Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. For we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. There's a third verse. We don't know if they ever went to the ball game. We have no idea. But the third verse is about Katie. Katie being a baseball fan. And she knows all the players. They don't have numbers on. They don't have their names on the back, but she knows all of the players. And she knows a bad call by an umpire when she sees it, and she's not afraid to give the umpire some guff if she thinks that she's right and the umpire was wrong. Again, not done by women back in those days, but Katie Casey did. And then she also knows how to get the players going. Rousing cheer of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. The song became famous on the vaudeville stage. It was written in 1908 by the songwriters Jack Norwith and Albert von Tilzer. They never did see a baseball game, so they imagined all of this going on in the baseball game because they never saw one. The song would become famous on the vaudeville stage. Nora Bayes, who became Norwith's wife after he broke up with the last one, popularized it along with Shine On, Harvest Moon. Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game until 1940. Norwith never saw a baseball game until 1928, long after the song was written. But funny thing about the song, yeah, it was popular on the vaudeville stage. Nora Bayes did that along with Shine On, Harvest Moon, but baseball never embraces the song. It wouldn't be until 1934 at the World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and Detroit Tigers in Detroit. Wouldn't be until then, until baseball finally embraces the song, and they finally embrace the song. Von Tilzer and Norwith are in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Take Me Out to the Ball Game, of course, is a baseball classic. It is played every day under normal circumstances without COVID. So let's go back to 2019. At baseball parks around the country, probably played at high school games as well. And it's played on the radio on opening day. And it's still getting airtime. Whereas Shine On Harvest Moon, Shine On Harvest Moon, which was great in its day, is probably pretty much forgotten or in some dusty old book near your piano. But Take Me Out to the Ball Game would take on a life of its own. Night at the Opera. Groucho Marx. Now, you probably recall, or you probably remember, if you've seen the movie, and I'm sure at the library they have a copy of Night at the Opera. Groucho Marx is working for Margaret Dumont, and they are going to Italy to find the world's greatest tenor who will perform at Margaret Dumont's opera in New York. Or she's the patron of the opera. And Groucho gets hooked up with Chico and Harpo. They have a friend who's a great tenor, played by Alan Jones, Jack Jones' father. And they're stowaways on the ship, and they get to the opera house, and they got to kill some time. They first have to knock off the real tenor, knock him out, get him out of the way. And then after they knock him out of the way, they have to go get him ready, the new guy. And Harpo and Chico decide the best way to kill some time is get some sheet music and go down to the pit and hand out the sheet music to everybody. in the orchestra, and they're playing in the overture or some area, and they stuff or they stick the music on the music stands, and they start playing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," and Harpo and Chico start having a catch. Groucho gets into his usher's uniform or his vendor's uniform and starts selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Harpo Marx would return to the song in I Love Lucy in 1955. Numerous movies and television shows have featured Take Me Out to the Ball Game, the song. And there was a, what happened to Who's on First? We are missing who? Well, anyway, who is not here? I don't know what happened to who. Oh, because he's here. St. Louis Cardinals or St. Louis Wolves. That's me. That's my problem. I should segue better to the Evan Costello. It happens sometimes. But anyway, there is Bud Abbott and there's Lou Costello. And that's a famous vaudeville burlesque routine. Who's on First? But Who's on First was a kind of a burlesque vaudeville routine, that was around back in the 1920s, 1930s. And basically it was this, as my comic friends Max Stocelli and John Joseph have told me. You had the idiot, the pinhead, played here by Lou Costello, and you had the smart aleck, played here by Bud Abbott. And the pinhead and the idiot, his job is to talk to the straight man. In this case, we'll do the baseball thing. He's a big baseball fan, and he loves the St. Louis Wolves, and he wants to talk about the lineup of the team. And Abbott is either the coach or the manager of the team, and Costello is going through the lineup, and he says, well, who's on first? And Abbott says, who? And they go back and forth, ridiculous things said when who gets paid, who gets it, whose wife? Every cent, back and forth, round and round and round and round. It goes and goes and goes. So the pinhead and the idiot is supposed to get frustrated while the smart aleck is just giving answers. That's all it is. It's an old form of vaudevillian comedy made famous in vaudeville in the 1920s. And somewhere along the way, Abbott and Costello would meet. Now, it's been suggested that at some point that Bud Abbott did this routine elsewhere, but that's not known. Baseball comes out of something called rounders. Now, I speak every summer up at the Berkshires. My wife has a place in the Berkshires, and I speak in Pittsfield at the UJF and other places. And I partake in some of the culture of the Berkshires. And in North Adams on the Massachusetts-Vermont border, there's an old factory that's been converted into an art museum. And across the street from the art museum is the Berkshire Baseball Museum. And it honors the local guys from that area, from the Pittsfield area. One of them, Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games with the New York Highlanders in 1904, the Yankees' predecessor. Jeff Reardon, who was a relief pitcher who pitched with the Mets and the Montreal Expos back in the 1980s. Anyway, to make a long story short, let me just get this thing in chat here for a second. If somebody had something in chat, well, the chat's not working. So I guess nobody is in the chat. Anyway, to make a long story short, can everybody hear me okay? Because I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Anyway, to make a long story short, there is the Baseball Museum, and in the window of the Baseball Museum, it's just a storefront museum, is this article. And in this article is about baseball, B-A-S-E, capital B-A-L-L, being played in the Berkshires as early as 1792, and they have a description of the game that was played in the Berkshires in 1792. As you may know, Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball. Baseball came out of a game called the Rounders in England, popular kids game, Rounders. Abbott and Costello, who's on first? Rounders. That's what it was called. So it's kind of ironic that the most famous vaudeville / radio / TV / movie comedy act ever in baseball's history is something called rounders. So it was a common style in those days. And of course, like I said, Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball. They found the Mills Commission at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. The Mills Commission wanted to find how baseball started in the United States. Well, there's some proof in the Berkshires that they were playing baseball in 1792, and a lot of those people came from England. But anyway, the Mills Commission decided we're going to find somebody who knows something about how Abner Doubleday founded the game. And they found this guy by the name of Abner Graves, who's kind of a drunk, who's an older guy who had a failing memory, but hey, this is our guy. This is it. He's the one. And he's going to give us the history of baseball. And yeah, I saw Abner Doubleday lay out the field when I was 5 years old in 1839. And, you know, and he laid it out, this, and this. And, okay, you can't hear me. Okay, hang on one second. Okay, can you hear me now? Are we okay now? Marie couldn't hear. Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, hello.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you as well. I just
Yes.
rejoined.
I can hear you.
Okay, so you want me to go, how much of Abbott and Costello did you hear?
None.
Okay, we'll start it again then. Okay, Abbott and Costello. So, okay, we're gonna start over again. Hopefully we're okay now. Abbott and Costello, the form of who's on first, what's on second, was called rounders. Rounders was basically, as my comic friends have told me in the past, it was a vaudeville burlesque style where you had the pinhead. The pinhead here played by Lou Costello was either the pinhead or the idiot. And the smart aleck played here by Bud Abbott. And basically the style was this, and it happened throughout the vaudeville years. And you had one guy who here, Costello would ask idiotic questions. Now, Costello here is a big baseball fan. And being that he was a big baseball fan, he meets the guy who's either the coach or manager of the St. Louis Wolves, and he wants to know all about the St. Louis Wolves. So he would ask all kind of questions like, oh, who's on first? And the smart aleck, Abbott, would say, who? No, who's on first? Who? Tell me who's on first. And they go round, you know, the whole routine, they go round and round and round, and the pinhead starts getting frustrated. And the smart aleck would just give answers, and they go round and round and round, which is why it was called rounders. This routine took about a minute or 10 minutes. And that's the way it was with rounders as well. If you went to a vaudeville stage or a burlesque, both burlesque, the one with QUE at the end, which was family entertainment, and the one with the K at the end of burlesque, which is when women took off their clothes. Baseball. When did baseball start? Well, baseball came out of a game called rounders. I speak at the Berkshires every year. I speak at the UJF, among other places up in the Berkshires. And one day, my wife has a cousin who has a place up there. We went up to North Adams, Massachusetts, right on the Vermont border, and there's an old factory where they made stuff that's been repurposed into an art museum. But across street from that art museum is the Berkshire Baseball Museum. And it's just the storefront. It honors people like Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games for the New York Highlanders back in 1904, the Yankees' predecessor, and Jeff Reardon, who was a pitcher with the Mets and the Expos in the 1980s, and others. And in the storefront window, as a way to get you in there, there's old article. I mean, I'm talking about old, from say 1792, where a baseball, B-A-S-E, capital B-A-L-L, baseball game played in Pittsfield. There's a description of that game. So baseball might have been played as early as 1792 in Massachusetts, and it probably could have been played then. But the Mills Commission decided they were going to find who started baseball, because they wanted the story that Abner Doubleday actually invented baseball in Cooperstown in 1839. And they found this guy out in Denver by the name of Abner Graves, who said, yeah, I was 5 years old. I saw Abner Doubleday lay out the baseball field and put everybody on the baseball field. I was there when they invented baseball. Graves was thoroughly unreliable and drank a little bit. But they accepted it. And, you know, the fairy tale is baseball started in Cooperstown. But baseball did come out of rounders, and this American classic was a type of a vaudeville act that was a common style called rounders. Now, here's a question. Did Abbott and Costello actually pay Michael Musto $15 for the routine? Not known. Now, I have a friend by the name of John Joseph who basically performs on cruise ships. He's a comic. Down at the Comedy Cellar last week. He was so happy that he worked for the first time in 13 months. Anyway, John when he had his partner, Johnny B., who did an offshoot of Who's on First music-wise, of course he paid $15, or they paid $15 for the routine. My other friend, Max Docelli, who spent 40 years on cruise ships doing stand-up, and grew up with Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David and Carol Leifler and Paul Reiser over at Caroline's in the late 1970s in Manhattan, said, hey, we're comics. We steal everything. Of course they didn't pay him. In fact, we don't even know if Michael Musto really came up with the act. Other people claim that they came up with the act. Somebody came up with the act, and Abbott and Costello perfected it, just like Jerry Lewis was up in the Catskills and used to see acts and used to incorporate those acts into whatever he did. He just did it better. Abbott and Costello did it better. In fact, Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect. George Schultz came up with that whole I get no respect thing. And George got off the road, opened up a comedy shop in Brooklyn, and said to Rodney, hey, take it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm off the road. Now you know the rest of the story about Rodney. That came from Max, who sold Rodney about 5 or 6 jokes at one point. So anyway, did they pay? Who knows? Did they perfect the routine? Yeah. Was it a baseball burlesque routine? Yeah. It's been suggested Abbott did a version of the routine before meeting Costello on the burlesque circuit. Abbott was the ticket taker who just one day went onto the stage, and Costello was on the stage, and they meet somewhere on the burlesque circuit, form a team, and they get together and they're really good. They become really, really good. They get onto the Kate Smith radio show, which was one of the top-rated radio shows in 1938, this act is ready to go. They may have gotten some help from Costello's writer, John Grant, and also from a guy by the name of Will Glickman, who lasted into the 1960s. He wrote Car 54, Where Are You? So many episodes of Car 54, Where Are You? So they get on to the Kate Smith show, and I don't have to say anything more. They killed that night. They absolutely killed. They're an overnight success. And they would perform at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. And they would perform in the movies, and they would perform on radio and on TV. And by 1956, they're the first outsiders ever to be enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame. Now, Vin Scully, about 15 years ago or so, Vin Scully simulcast with the Dodgers. He did the first 2 innings on both radio and TV, and did the rest of the game on TV. And he's looking up at his screen. And Vin, of course, had been the Dodgers announcer since he was a kid at Fordham University when he was 21 years old in 1950. And Vinny's looking at the screen, and he says, now we got the answer to the eternal baseball question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who's on first? The Dodgers had a player from South Korea. His name, who? H-O. And now you know the rest of the story. Who's on first? This is about 15 years ago. There was a what. Watt played second base with the Washington team in the 1920s before this routine became famous, if the routine existed in the 1920s. But I can guarantee you this, I know this for a fact, that there has never been a player from Little League on up who ever played third base named I don't give a darn. About 4 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park to see Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. My wife and I, we had a nice day. It was a nice September day in 2017 up on the Hudson River. Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous day. And I needed to talk to Franklin about a couple of things, 3 things actually. I wanted to know why the American team went to participate in the Berlin Olympics, the Nazi games, the Hitler games in 1936, why he allowed it. I wanted to know about being the first person on American TV, which he was, April 30th, 1939, at the opening of the World's Fair. And I also wanted to know about the green light letter, which allowed baseball to play during World War II. See, so Franklin and Eleanor, they were charming. They were really charming. A little stiff, just a little stiff. The books were a little stiff, but they were charming. I did get my answers. I actually knew 1936 because I worked with Marty Glickman. Marty had a broadcast school back for NBC broadcasters in the 1980s, and occasionally I would be the color commentator working with somebody who is looking to be on network TV. Most of Marty's students never made it to network TV. They did local stuff, but they never made it. Marty wanted to go to the Olympics. He said he wanted to win a gold medal because he wanted to stick it in the Fuhrer's face. I also knew Sam Stoller, who was part of the 4x100 relay with Marty, who never ran in Berlin. As Marty said, that Avery Brundage, who was running the American team, wanted to spare the Fuhrer the embarrassment of seeing 2 Jews on the podium winning a gold medal. And Roosevelt also said that he didn't think it would be a good idea to miss the Olympics. So we got that. As far as being on TV, he was used to big crowds. He was used to giving his fireside chats. That wasn't a problem. But the green light letter, Pearl Harbor is bombed. And Roosevelt gets a letter from this guy, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the baseball commissioner. And Landis asks the president, well, what are we going to do? In 1918, our season was cut short, not because of the Spanish flu, but because of World War I. And the season was truncated in September. The American League just wanted to end the season. The National League said, let's finish to the end. Let's play the World Series. Well, they did play the World Series, which was a good thing for the American League because behind Babe Ruth's left arm, the Boston Red Sox would beat the Chicago Cubs. And Roosevelt had reasons for continuing baseball. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5 hours. He hasn't seen Red Sox Yankee games, right? But then again, he's been dead since 1945, which can be got for very little cost. He wasn't at opening day at Yankee Stadium for the $80 bleacher seats for the bleacher creatures. But then again, his class could afford $80 or $1,500. And incidentally, I hope that night games could be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Baseball was so important to the American psyche. And he felt that, listen, we need to keep baseball going as best we can. And it's part of America. It's part of the American fabric. So we keep baseball going. And other sports followed baseball and continued going, including the National Football League, National Hockey League, boxing, golf, which were some of the big sports, and of course, horse racing. Babe Ruth was in 10 movies between, say, 1920 and about 1941. A silent film, Hitting Home, stars Babe as a baseball star. Typecast, huh? Starred in Babe Comes Home, a 1927 silent movie for which no print has survived because back in those days, you really had to take care of the print. And I guess most of the producers or the people who owned the print didn't want to take the time to keep the print going, so the print disintegrated. He also appeared in a Harold Lloyd silent movie in 1928, Speedy. They kept that print. Again, portraying himself in a cameo role, he's signing autographs for kids. And he spots Harold Lloyd, who's a cab driver, and says, "Get me to the stadium." He gets into the cab. Lloyd's a cab driver, and it's a cab ride for the ages, or for the movie anyway. Ruth was in 10 movies, starting with Heading Home, the last one, The Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story. But the first real star that emerged from baseball on the silver screen, on Broadway, on the stage, was this guy, a second baseman with the New York Giants by the name of Mike Donlin, the baseball idol of Manhattan. .333 career hitter, but he was not around the game all that much because he took breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville because she could make more money doing that. He retired for good in 1914, and he went straight into the movies. He was typecast. He starred in a movie called Right Off the Bat, which featured his New York Giants manager, John McGraw, who also was kind of an actor himself. He was in a number of movies. Donlin was in at least 53 movies. Some of them might have been made in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which was the movie capital of the world at one time. If you ever go to the Fort Lee, New Jersey library on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, about 2 miles off the bridge, the parking lot, in the parking lot of the Fort Lee library is where the film industry was back in the 19-teens. And there are still signs around there talking about what movies were shot in Fort Lee back in the 19-teens, where Donlin might have been part of. That is not Gary Cooper. That is Lou Gehrig. And Lou Gehrig was in a movie called Rawhide. It's probably around somewhere. It's not really worth watching. The whole plot is stupid. Here is Gehrig, who is New York City born, went to high school in New York City, went to Columbia in New York City, played for the New York Yankees, lived over in New Rochelle on Lou Gehrig Way, down the street from the library, not too far from the library, about 3 miles. And here he is, Grand Central Terminal. He's in front of the assembled sports writers here. He's got his cowboy hat on, and he's telling the sports writers, you know what, that's it, I'm gone. I'm absolutely gone. I can't take it anymore. There's too much pressure on me. Me and my sister, he's married at the time. He's married to Ellie at the time. Me and my sister, we're going out to Montana. We bought a ranch. I'm going to relax in solitude, spend the rest of my life there. It's going to be great, and I'm not playing baseball anymore. Well, it's a stupid movie, except there's one thing about this movie which is kind of interesting for medical research. This movie was done before Lou Gehrig is diagnosed with the ALS. And doctors have a baseline before his first ALS appointment, or where they diagnose it. They could look at his movements in this movie, how he moved his arms, how he moved his legs, how he moved his head, shoulders, whatever. So they have a baseline. They could see how Lou Gehrig is moving around. So they could tell how quickly the disease was ravaging him, just based on this movie. Funny thing about Gehrig and Ruth. Gehrig, this is his contribution to medical research. Babe Ruth had throat cancer. Babe Ruth was one of the first people ever to get chemotherapy. And he knew he was going to be a guinea pig, but he had nothing to lose. He had throat cancer. And initially, the throat cancer chemotherapy did work, and then he went downhill. So when you think of Ruth and Gehrig and Murderers Row in 1927, you think of baseball. But in terms of medical research, both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig did contribute something to medical research. The 1938 movie, Rawhide, was a Western. Bugs Bunny was in a cartoon. He took on the Gas House Gorillas after the Gas House Gorillas were thumping the teetotalers. Gas House Gorillas, of course, take off on the St. Louis Cardinals 1934 baseball team, which was called the Gas House Gang. And Bugs is your typical heckler out in right field. He's got his carrot juice. He's got his half-eaten carrot. He's got his popcorn. I'll murder the bums. And this is supposedly set at the Polo Grounds. And he takes these guys on and eventually beats them. I learned everything in life from Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny cartoons. Greatest cartoons ever. I learned a lot from them. League of Their Own, based on the Rockford Peaches and the league that Phil Wrigley founded in 1943. The Women's League, here is Madonna jumping in Rosie O'Donnell's arms, Gina Davis with the catcher's chest protector on. Tom Hanks is in this movie. He's playing a character based on the home run slugger Jimmy Fox, the great home run slugger Jimmy Fox in baseball's Hall of Fame. And the famous line from Tom Hanks in here, "There's no crying in baseball." There is the Lou Gehrig story, Gary Cooper playing Lou Gehrig, and it is said because of this movie, the speech, "I consider myself today the luckiest man in the face of the earth," resonated and caught on because of this movie, not because of Lou Gehrig giving that July 4th, 1939 speech at Yankee Stadium. Bull Durham, Kevin Costner, the veteran catcher as Crash Davis, along with Tim Robbins. Baseball used to have catchers who hung on and played in the minor leagues to literally nurse guys with $1-million arms and 10-cent heads. Ron Shelton wrote this movie. He was a Baltimore Orioles farmhand. And it's about a guy by the name of Steve Dalkowski, who was Shelton's teammate back in the 1960s, who could throw a baseball at about 105 miles an hour, had no control throwing it to home plate. Dalkowski actually was on a baseball card in 1963. He had a shot with the Orioles, never made it after spring training. But anyway, Shelton has also a love triangle in there with Susan Sarandon, Costner, and Tim Robbins. But this is a typical baseball story, really. The catcher trying to harness the guy who couldn't get the ball over the plate. Dalkowski also had a problem controlling his life as well, which is why he never made it in Baltimore. There's Jerry Lewis. After, I don't know how many of you in polite company I could say this name, Walter O'Malley. Can I say O'Malley in polite company here? Anyway, Walter O'Malley moves the Dodgers from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, and Dodger players become the darling of Hollywood. And here's Jerry Lewis directing Pee Wee Reese. Don Zimmer is in the back there in the movie The Geisha Boy, 1959. Robert Redford, The Natural. This movie and this book might be in the library. Costner again with an actor playing Joe Jackson in Field of Dreams, about the Iowa cornfield. You build it, they will come. Last year, the Yankees and White Sox were supposed to play in an Iowa cornfield, but that was knocked out because of COVID-19. Billy Beane, the smartest guy in the world. All you have to do is ask him, the Oakland A's general manager, the father of modern day analytics in baseball. Moneyball, here's Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane. And that probably book and DVD is in the library. Probably the last big baseball movie, Moneyball. And Walter Matthau, who is great in anything he does, whether it's playing the reoccurring roles with Jack Lemmon in The Fortune Cookie, Odd Couple, Grumpy Old Men. Remember, he played the sports writer who covered baseball in The Odd Couple, Oscar Madison, and here he is as the coach or manager of the Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bail Bonds. Major League with Charlie Sheen, 2 major leagues. And there is me in Pittsburgh in October of 2018, leaning against the wall at Forbes Field. And to my right, if I walked a little bit, was the spot where Yogi was chasing Bill Mazeroski's fly ball until he gave up. And the fly ball went over the wall in left field, and the Pittsburgh Pirates, on a walk-off home run by Bill Mazeroski, beat the New York Yankees. This is the only thing that remains of Forbes Field, which is right in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh. This wall is right there and commemorates where Forbes Field was. And the reason I have that up there was Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates starting in 1946. Same year, Bob Hope became part owner of the Cleveland Indians. Hope, of course, was a Cleveland native. But there's more to this than that. Bing Crosby decided when he heard that there was a movie called Angels in the Outfield that was going to be made, he decided, hey, why don't you guys use Forbes Field? It's a pretty field. It was still in good shape. It was only at that point 37 years old. It was run down by the time Pittsburgh moved to Three Rivers Stadium. But use it, and they did. So Hope is in Cleveland, Crosby is in Pittsburgh, so they took the road to Cleveland and Pittsburgh separately. Danny Kaye, another comedian, was the part owner of the Seattle Mariners in 1977. Some of the movies: Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural Moneyball. Just some of the movies where baseball is the central theme in the movie. That's a Pulitzer Prize winning picture taken by Nat Fine. Nat Fine was with the New York Journal American. And Nat Fine, I met in 1979. He was working in Piermont for Orange and Rockland Utilities and also had a little photography shop. He was 14 years removed from his newspaper career at that point because the New York World Telegram, the New York Herald Tribune, and the New York Journal American all merged, became the World Journal Tribune, 3 papers. Nat was odd man out, even though Nat won the Pulitzer Prize for that picture. Now, I've had some scoops in my career. And I can tell you, you don't have to be good to be a scoop. You just have to be, to get a scoop, you have to be in the right place at the right time. My right place at the right time, first time I did it, I was 21 years old. I was in Nyack at the Tappan Zee townhouse. There was a Democratic fundraiser that day. John Lindsay walked in, decided to tell me in 1978 he was running for Senate, state of New York in 1980. Boom, got my scoop, and that's how I got on WNEW radio in New York. I was 21 years old. Nat told me that you can see the photographers in the picture. And Nat told me this was Babe's last appearance. Babe was dying at this point. The chemo wore off. And he was getting dressed in the Yankees' third base clubhouse. That's where they were back in this old stadium back then, on the third base side. And all the photographers are taking Babe, slowly putting on his uniform for the last time. Everybody knew it was the last time. And they got their pictures, and they ran out on the first base line so they could take pictures of Babe on the third base line. But Nat decided he was going to do something else. He waited around. So he got those pictures too. And he decided to follow Babe through the tunnel, up the steps, and stopped at the steps. And he took this picture of Babe Ruth the last time he stood for the national anthem at Yankee Stadium, leaning on the bat. And this thing became a Pulitzer Prize winning picture, one of the few sports Pulitzer Prize winning pictures, Babe Ruth. Homer Simpson, 1992, Springfield City Champions. 1992, Springfield Nuclear Power Plant wins the city championship against a bunch of major leaguers. There's Smithers with the trophy, and Monty Burns, the owner of the nuclear power plant. Hey, Sandy Koufax. I don't know if he's signing that for Mr. Ed or Wilbur. Alan Young, who played Wilbur Post. Sandy Koufax was on Mr. Ed. Leo DeRocher was on the Munsters, scouting players. Even though he's a third base coach at the time, he scouted Herman, signed him. Herman didn't make the team, but he was part of the Munsters, Leo DeRocher. Oh, Jim Lefevre. Jim Lefevre is on the right. Al Ferrara is on the left. Ferrara, both with the LA Dodgers, said that he knew he made it when he had his own baseball card. Oh, in the 1990s, when Frenchie, Jim Lefevre was managing the Seattle Mariners while I was covering baseball. I asked him, what do you do on Gilligan's Island? He said, we're headhunters. We're going to shrink Gilligan's head, and we were going to eat him. Of course, that never happened. And I said, so many people saw the Castaways. How come nobody ever talked? He said, and what? And ruin the show? Johnny Roseborough, he was on Dragnet 1968. O'Malley, the Dodgers owner, appeared with the Rifleman star and the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in a show called Branded in 1965. The Dodgers center fielder Willie Davis acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front and The Flying Nun with Sally Field. Roseborough, Dragnet 1968. Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. Now, if I was with you, this is what I would ask, but Zoom has its limitations. Ask you who the guy is on the left and who the guy is on the right. Well, the guy on the left, Phil Silvers, the Phil Silvers Show, You'll Never Get Rich. The Bilko Show by Nat Hiken, who also did Car 54, Where Are You? Great show. Both of them great shows. On the right is Steve Bilko, who was playing with Los Angeles in the Pacific Coast League. He wasn't good enough to make the major leagues, but he was too good to play in the Pacific Coast League, so he went up and down and up and down. Today, he'd probably make the major leagues, be a big home run hitter and strike out 200 times a year. But anyway, Nat Hiken, who did the Bilko Show and Car 54, fell in love with Steve Bilko while he was watching Los Angeles Angels Pacific Coast League games. And he decided it's a great name to use for a TV show and a character, Ernie Bilko. You know, Yogi was on the Bilko Show. And I said to Yogi one day, you're on the Bilko Show, right? Yeah. I said, what were you and all you guys, I think it was Hank Bauer, a few others, what were you guys doing at Fort Baxter in Kansas on the show? Yogi said, we're in the Bronx. Yeah, I know, it was Biograph Studios. I know that. What were you doing? What were you doing in Kansas? No, we're in the Bronx. I went over the George Washington Bridge on the Cross Bronx Expressway, went past the exit to Yankee Stadium, went down a little bit, got off, we're in the Bronx. And at that point I said, you know, if you see a fork in the road, take it. So there was no, Yogi had his reason. He was absolutely correct. They were in the Bronx. They were not in Kansas. Anyway, Donna Reed Show, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, The Munsters, Phil Silvers Show, Bilko, all featured baseball players. Phil Rizzuto was the first mystery guest on What's My Line. And this is Moose Stubing of the Bronx. He was born in 1932, recently passed away. He was the manager of the Angels, the Anaheim Angels in the 1980s, a long time minor leaguer. And that is Captain Merrill Stubing of the Love Boat. So you got the two Stubings. So how are they together? Well, Aaron Spelling put together the Love Boat, along with other, as he called, schlocky shows, because he was the king of schlock, as he described himself. The Love Boat, The Pain, Fantasy Island, Dynasty, Charlie's Angels, among some of his bigger hits. Charlie's Angels, the voice of Charlie's Angels that you never saw was John Forsythe. Anyway, Spelling used the baseball encyclopedia to name his TV characters and named Captain Stubing of the Love Boat for Moose Stubing because he stumbled across Moose's name in the baseball encyclopedia. Now, getting back to John Forsythe, he was the Brooklyn Dodgers public relations announcer. That was his first paying job ever. He had that great voice. And he did that in the 1950s. He would star in one of Spelling's biggest hits, Dynasty, in the 1980s. And here he is, full circle, going from the PA booth down to the field for the Dodgers in LA, not Brooklyn. And he's standing next to Jack Lemmon. I mentioned Walter Matthau before. Jack Lemmon, of course, was in The Odd Couple. He played Felix Unger. And Walter Matthau played Oscar Madison, sports writer, who had a New York Mets hat on, if you remember, in The Odd Couple. Anyway, Oscar is out at Shea Stadium covering a Mets-Pittsburgh Pirates game. And the phone rings in the press box at Shea Stadium. And I know exactly where that phone was that he had to go to. And you couldn't really see the field all that well if you stood in front of the phone or even moved to the side. There wasn't much give to the phone. And you also had to stand looking at the wall to knock out the noise that was coming back at you. And Felix Unger calls Oscar Madison, asking him what he wants cooked for dinner. Meanwhile, Bill Mazeroski, originally supposed to be Roberto Clemente, but he said no, hits into a triple play. And it's the most exciting play of the year, and Oscar misses it. And you know what happens in The Odd Couple. There's a fight between Felix and Oscar, but there you got another piece of baseball culture in The Odd Couple. Bob Uecker, who I've known for a very long time, the longtime voice of the Milwaukee Brewers, who is in the Baseball Hall of Fame as an announcer. Uke played with the Milwaukee Braves, the Atlanta Braves, Philadelphia Phillies, St. Louis Cardinals. He was in community relations after his career ended with the Braves in 1968 or so. And he was doing a stand-up comedy routine throughout the South. The trumpet player, Al Hurt, comes into the club one day, sees Uke, thinks he's the funniest thing going, and he tells Carson and Carson's people. And eventually Freddie DeCovia or somebody else books him onto the show. And Uke does his stand-up. He kills. He's invited to the couch, which for a comedy, for a comic, is like being inducted into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And Johnny starts talking to him. And Johnny leans over during the break and said, well, I hear you were a baseball player. Is that true? And Uke has a card saying, yeah, I have a baseball card, so I guess I am. Uke was on that show 50 times, at least 50 times. Wrote books, and of course was part of the Miller Lite commercial package. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Damn Yankees, about Joe Hardy and the Washington Senators always losing, except they were in the World Series in 1933, and this is 20 years later, but those damn Yankees are winning every year, right? Didn't win in 1954 or 55. Or 57 or 59, but they won 6 championships around that time. And anyway, so there's the damn Yankees on Broadway. Joe Hardy sells his soul so Washington can win. There's one other song in that play that is sort of famous, maybe not today, but it was famous in its day. You Gotta Have Heart, sung by the 1969 New York Mets. On our stage here tonight, our really big show, Ed Sullivan. My cousin was Jerry Stiller. Stiller and Mirror were on that show 36 times, and he said some of Ed's quirkinesses were not really quirkinesses. This, looking at his wristwatch, making sure the act's going on time, and he's an old boxing ring announcer, which means that all these hand gestures and everything else, all the hand gestures, basically were because he was an old ring announcer. And that's a good segue to this, my cousin Jerry, who was on the Seinfeld show. That's Jerry with my 2 kids. And Seinfeld, some of the shows were based around George M. Steinbrenner III, the New York Yankees owner. And George, some of those stories were really, well, Marty Appel, who was the New York Yankees PR guy in the early days of George, told me that Larry David used to get some real inside stuff came from the man himself, who suggested storylines that Larry David put into 22-minute comedy shows. Among them, Missing George, board meeting move, different uniforms. Missing George. My cousin Jerry is a central character of Missing George. The real story was George had an employee at American Ship in Tampa, and George thought he was hanging out with some really bad guys, and he was a little worried about he was hanging out with bad guys. This guy was essentially a good guy, but George was worried that he was messing around with bad guys. So it's a Friday afternoon. George leaves the office in Tampa. This guy goes home, or supposed to go home. And that was supposed to be it. But Monday morning, George gets into the office like he normally did about 5 o'clock in the morning. And he's looking at, as he drives into the garage, the parking lot, that guy's car is there. And George said, uh-oh, they finally caught up with him. His car is here. He may be dead. So he calls the Tampa Police Department. They put out an all-points bulletin because George thinks he's dead. Meanwhile, the guy comes strolling in later on in the day, and George says, oh, my God, you're all, what happened? He said, I just went away for the weekend with my friend. You know, he drove, so I left my car here. Okay, so he left the car there. But that becomes a story. And it's George Costanza is dead. Well, George thinks he's dead. Same story. And they go to Frank Costanza, played by my cousin Jerry. And the actor who's playing George Steinbrenner, voiced by Larry David. They knock on the door. Mr. Costanza, because George Costanza was the traveling secretary of the New York Yankees, assistant traveling secretary, part of the whole show. He says, Mr. Costanza, we think your son George is dead. And Jerry Stiller gives him this look as Frank Costanza says, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Highlight of the show, actually. Jay Buhner was traded from the Yankees to Seattle and ended up with a pretty good career in Seattle. Ken Phelps washed out with the Yankees. Board meeting moved. Well, as Marty Appel said, somebody once brought in some food. George wanted to know, where'd you get it? Because George's food, or your food, was George's food too. He picked up the whole meeting and went to a restaurant around Yankee Stadium. Different uniforms, tried in the minor leagues, the Yankees Tampa affiliate, and didn't work, but it became a show. And George was on the show, or at least they tried to put him on the show. You could go up to YouTube and see this clip, and didn't work. George wasn't very good at this. He didn't work. They wanted buffoon George, and George must have thought he was Olivier. Didn't work. Jerry Seinfeld was quoted. He actually did a scene in the show, and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. The Mets, Keith Hernandez and Roger McDowell were on the Seinfeld show. George Costanza here, played by Jason Alexander, is upset that Jerry is spending too much time with Keith Hernandez, and he's afraid he's going to lose his friendship with Jerry. Well, that's a story idea. At the end, Keith Hernandez breaks up with Julia Louis-Dreyfus' character Elaine, and George gets Jerry back as his best friend. Hernandez said about his Seinfeld appearance, when his agent Scott Boras said, you want to be on Seinfeld? He said, what's that? Boras explained it. Fly about first class, be in a nice hotel for a week. Oh yeah, by the way, they'll give you 15 grand. And Keith said, oh yeah, I know Seinfeld. And he was ready to play himself on the show. Apparently, the two of them have become good friends over the years, and Keith really did not know Jerry Seinfeld until the show. George was a host on Saturday Night Live. And one skit, he plays all 9 positions on the field, along with DH, manager, coach, general manager, owner. You know what? That wasn't very far. That was not a very far stretch for the writers on Saturday Night Live, because I think George would have loved to have done that. And that's Garrett Morris. It's Chico Escuela. Baseball been very, very good to me back in the early days of Saturday Night Live. New York Mets star Chico Escuela. I was going to drop Wally Pipp from this, but I decided to leave Wally in there because season 37, episode 1, he was the question. Who was replaced? Who did Lou Gehrig replace as first baseman of the New York Yankees? Wally Pipp, when I was a kid, I always heard the expression, don't get Wally Pipp. You don't hear it anymore. After all, Wally Pipp was Wally Pipp 96 years ago on June 2nd, 1925. The myth? He lost his job to Lou Gehrig, because of a headache. The truth? Yeah, he was beamed a few days before, but Lou Gehrig was a 23-year-old stud at this point who belonged in the major leagues. The moral of the story for Wally Pipp, don't call in sick, because someone else will do your job and they may do it better. Season 37, show 1 on Jeopardy. Cigarettes in baseball, a big thing. Here's Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. The Babe looks like he's sitting on old Sparky and Sing Sing with that blindfold around his eyes, and he's testing out Old Gold cigarettes. Old Gold mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Not a cough in a carload. The baseball man's cigarette was Chesterfield, and you could see the stars of the day, Joe D. and Stan Musial and Ted Williams. Joe didn't pay for that cigarette, I can guarantee you that. Bob Elliott, the MVP of the National League in 1947. Bucky Harris, the world champion Yankee manager in 1947. And Ewell Blackwell of the Cincinnati Reds. Joe Garagiola and I knew each other. Not well, but we knew each other. And Joe was talking about Yogi, who he knew since he was 2 years old. And he was talking about Yogi's business acumen, or lack of there, but luck. He said when Yogi would step in something, we'll leave the something out, business-wise, he always stepped in it, and did well. Mickey Mantle, who probably had Cuddy Sark in his Yoo-Hoo, Moose Scourin, one of my favorite people to interview. He was great. Loved his stories. Just loved his stories. Nice guy. Sterilized, too. Didn't realize that. And Ellie Howard, the catcher of the Yankees. If it's sterilizing, you got to get the Cuddy Sark out. Here's what Garagiola was talking about. Yogi is at a country club in 1955, as are the Oliveri family. As is the Oliveri family, and Yoo-Hoo can't get onto the shelves at the grocery stores. The problem with Yoo-Hoo and getting on the shelves at the grocery store was Yoo-Hoo. I never liked Yoo-Hoo. It was chocolate and water mixed together. That's what it tasted like. But the Oliveris decided, you know what? Let's see what Yogi thinks. Maybe, just maybe he can help us. So I give Yogi the drink. He tastes the drink. Yogi was on board. Yogi made a lot of money from Yoo-Hoo. One time, Dave Kaplan, you might have Dave's books at the library. One time I was in the office. Dave was the guy who ran the Yogi Berra Museum and drove Yogi around. I have a lot of stories about that. One time I was in the office and the phone rang when no one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-Hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Hey, Kraft Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. I used to have a car, 1966 Chevrolet Caprice station wagon. It was blue when I was 17 years old. Yogi Berra, and I had one of those batteries, but I only had to do it twice a year. Back in the 1950s, Yogi says, I had water only 3 times a year. Press to light, high-level battery. Yogi sold Miller beer. He also sold Mapo at one point. And Affleck. This Christmas, ask Mom and Dad for Shelby, the winner's bike. I like Shelby because it's streamlined. It's the slickest streamlined bike on the road. Tell him Yogi sent you. Yogi's teammate, of course, him, Joe DiMaggio. Guaranteed, didn't pay for the cigarette or anything else at the Stark Club that night. And there is his wife at the point, Marilyn. January 14th, 1954, Joe D. and Marilyn elope in San Francisco. October 1954, Monroe filed for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. I have had a lot of hearsay stories told to me over the years about what happened this day when Joe D. went home after the scene was shot. Cruelty seemed to be a major part of the stories told to me by some of the old Yankees like Johnny Blanchard and Tommy Tresh and Whitey Ford. That's 26-foot Maryland. She was on display in 2017 in Stamford, Connecticut, right in the middle of town. And if you walked out of the First Congregational Church, you saw the upsweep. If you walked out of the church to our left, your right, you saw her side. Joe D. was at the filming or the shoot of the subway scene, which lifted up her skirt that day, and apparently that night convinced Marilyn that it wasn't worth being married anymore. See, Joe wanted a few things from a wife. He wanted a stay-at-home wife. He wanted a wife who would cook him dinner. He wanted a wife less famous than he was, and a wife that didn't make as much money as he did. On every account, Marilyn failed. Although they were talking about getting back together in 1962, and then Marilyn either committed suicide or took a drug overdose, one of the two. Joe in song, Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt because it was done initially for the movie The Graduate, and Paul Simon was looking for heroes, building a song out from a 37-second or so snatch of incidental movie music that Mike Nichols and others, Mike Nichols put together The Graduate, suggested he do. We didn't start the fire, Billy Joel, Joe DiMaggio, from the 1940s. Duke Ellington, did you see Jackie hit that ball? And Therese Brewer, Mickey. But let's talk about a song you probably have heard about 15,000 times over the last 53 years, Mrs. Robinson, by Simon and Garfunkel. That's the 45. Back with old friends and bookends. You don't see 45s anymore. The story I got from Johnny Blanchard and others was Joe and Paul Simon went out to dinner. Paul paid for it, of course. And Joe walked in and said, "What do you mean? Where have I gone? Where have I gone? What do you mean? I'm here. I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I did a Bowery commercial the other day. I'm doing Mr. Coffee. I'm around. I haven't gone anywhere." And Paul Simon said, "Yeah, but when you were 10 years old, you retired. I never saw you again. You know, so where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? You were my hero." And it went on all night like that. Eventually, Joe said, okay. They shook hands and left. Paul Simon was on Dick Cavett one night back then and talked about meeting DiMaggio and talked about going intellectual on DiMaggio, which was always a mistake. I said I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero, and then genuine heroes were in short supply. Paul Simon had Eleanor Roosevelt in mind. He had Ted Williams, the war hero and the great baseball player, in mind when he wrote the song, and then settled on DiMaggio. He accepted the explanation and thanked me. We shook hands and said good night. Cavett also knew that Mickey Mantle was not happy with this. Why? Because Mantle, well, Joe DiMaggio and Mantle didn't like one another. DiMaggio's 37 in 1951, and he looks to his left and he sees Mantle. He's beautiful, he's blonde, he's chiseled. Mantle comes out of the earth, and Joe D is over the hill, he's 37. Now, in the 1951 World Series against the Giants, there's a fly ball hits a right center field, and Mantle had that great explosive speed back then, and he's running and he trips over a drain and tears up his knee. And he always blamed DiMaggio for loafing on the ball for his knee injury. And so that's why they hated one another. Mantle once asked Paul Simon, "Why'd you use him, not me?" And he said, "Mickey Mantle doesn't sound as good as Joe DiMaggio." Cavett asked why Mantle's name wasn't used instead of DiMaggio. Simon said, "It's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are." Oh, I get to see my periodontist tomorrow. That reminds me, I got 8 o'clock tomorrow in Riverdale. I got to see my periodontist. And oh yeah, and this guy does too. We have the same periodontist. It's Terry Cashman, baseball's balladeer, a guy I've known since the 1980s. And he wrote the song, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, Talking Baseball, Terry Cashman. If you notice that sleeve, there's the Duke, and there's Willie, and there's Mickey, and somebody is missing. Joe D. It was at Shea Stadium. The 4 of them came in together, but Terry Cashman only used 3 of them in the song. So there's no Joe D. Cashman was once asked by Joe D, well, why wasn't I in there? And he said it was about players of the 1950s. And Joe D, even though he played 2 years in the 1950s, said, yeah, you're probably right. I didn't belong there. So he's left out of the picture sleeve. The Scooter, that's the Scooter, Phil Rizzuto, only guy in the Baseball Hall of Fame who also owns a gold record, Phil Rizzuto. And he was on the 1978 Meatloaf record, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. And Meatloaf, who lived here in Westchester County, I got to know him a little bit back in the day, coached his girls' softball team, said he and Jim Steinman, who wrote the song, wanted Scooter because they loved him on Channel 11. They just wanted him to be Phil Rizzuto, and they had this picked out in mind. It was a guy and a girl in the backseat of a car, and well, they wanted to use baseball terms to describe what was going on, and if he hits a home run, they get married. And I've cleaned that up. And he's a daring base runner who makes it to second, goes to third base, and comes home on the suicide squeeze. And the end of the story is the guy regrets it because he's stuck with this woman the rest of his life. Scooter said he didn't know what the song was about. This is in case kids are watching. And he said, we were talking about that one day, and he says, Huckleberry, he fooled me. I said, you giving up the gold record? Of course not. Baseball cards. Yeah, one of the reasons I go to the periodontist because I ate the baseball picture cards bubble gum, but baseball card, a lot of us did that. A lot of us had teeth problems because it was like chewing, it was like biting into the floor. A baseball card could teach you, if you wanted to how to add, subtract, multiply, divide. It was your entree to gambling. Remember, you flipped cards? You also figured out if you needed some cards, who to trade to get those cards. So it was a business thing as well. It says Oakland on the top of this card, or in this card, for it's Jose Canseco, old card. And so if you wanted to look up where Oakland was, you could get your atlas and find out where Oakland was. And it was great for bicycle flaps. You put a clothespin in the spokes, put a baseball card in there, and whirling, whirling, whirling. So, no real new songs, no new literature, but it's time for Yogi again. Ernest Hemingway, the book's got to be in the library, Old Man in the Sea. Well, Ernest Hemingway's meeting the Yankees in the clubhouse one day. Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, and so it goes. Until they get to Yogi Berra. Ernest and Dave Kaplan told me the story, the guy who ran the museum, and Yogi's museum. And Hemingway is introduced to Yogi. Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand and says, "What paper you write for, Ernie?" Should have said the Kansas City Star. Would have been right. It's just another sport. Oh yeah, Homer Simpson honored by the Hall of Fame in 2017 with Casey at the bat. John Fogerty center field, 1985, A League of Their Own. Who's on first? But oddly enough, the Hall of Fame has never, ever honored Take Me Out to the Ball Game. That's Joe Namath. That's me on the right talking to him, with Bruce Morton on the left, my buddy from ABC. And we're talking about the New York Jets' 20th anniversary of the Super Bowl win, 1969. This is 1988 up at Wingfoot in Mamaroneck. And Joe's victory in the Super Bowl cemented football as the #1 sport in America, although it passed baseball in 1965. 1950, baseball, horse racing, and boxing dominated American sports. They used to do movies about Seabiscuit and horses. They don't do that. Well, they have once or twice, but it used to be a regular thing. By 65, football surpassed baseball. And there's Muhammad Ali, me and him in 1985, when he was punch drunk already and Parkinson's kicked in. Hey, there's nobody bigger in sports or in boxing than Ali in 1970s, but Ali left and so did boxing. Horse racing, horse racing survives on, as you know, if you ever go to Empire City, on the slots at racetracks. That's Jim Bouton, and that's me. 2007, we used to miss each other. It's the only time that we were together, actually, in one place at Yogi's Museum in 2007. He wrote Ball 4, which is probably in the library. Great, great book, Humanized Baseball Players. Bowie Kuhn, the baseball commissioner, said to Jim Bouton, calling him in, say it's all a lie, and Bouton refused to say that, absolutely refused to say it. It's a great baseball book, one of the most influential books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library, used as part of the arbitration sessions when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause, which meant that baseball players had to stay with the team in perpetuity unless the owner and management decided to get rid of that player. Here I am in 2015, soccer movie called The Sons of Ben on the red carpet. I'm in that movie. Soccer gets better TV ratings than baseball does in certain cities and nationally on the Saturday weekend game of Saturday game of the week, actually. Now, we end here. It ain't over until it's over. You know, if you see a fork in the road, take it, or nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. You better go to their funeral because they won't go to yours. It gets late early out there, talking about the shadows at Yankee Stadium in October in left field. The future ain't what it used to be. It ain't over until it's over. Well, it ain't over until it's over. Mike Dyer is a sports writer. He lives in Sarasota, Florida now. He's about 78, 79 years old. In 1973, he was with the Long Island Press. And if you remember the 1973 season, the Mets would win the National League East. They had a lot of players that were injured. And Donald Grant, the chairman of the board, gave the Mets a pep talk where Tug McGraw came out yelling, "You got to believe, you got to believe, you got to believe." Mets, yeah, Yogi's team's hanging in there. Nobody's running away with the NL East. Pittsburgh isn't, St. Louis isn't, Montreal, Philadelphia, Chicago. Even though the Mets are all injured and are mediocre at best, they still have a shot, but they can't lose games. If they start losing more than 2 games, they're done. So they lose a game at Shea Stadium. and it makes it more difficult for Yogi's team. And Mike Dyer is with all the other sports writers, and they're all crowded around the desk. And Mike is asking a question, knowing that this loss wasn't fatal, but it was a bad loss in terms of winning the National League East. And Mike said, Yogi, is it over? Yogi said, it ain't over until it's over. His most famous saying, and that's the whole story behind it. It ain't over until it's over, but it's over. That was the last time I saw Yogi. That was June 26th in 2011. So that was it. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the library for inviting me. And any questions, any comments, the floor is all yours. I am done speaking. Any questions, any comments? Anybody?